We treat buildings as silent. Walls, glass, concrete, just background. But they are not neutral. A house reflects your desire for privacy or display. A library shows whether you value access or let neglect take hold. A skyscraper reveals ambition, inequality, or both. Buildings don't only hold us, they shape us. They enforce habits, preserve memory, and stage power. Step inside and the space already knows you. It whispers what you believe, what you ignore, and what you choose to care for. Architecture is never mute. It speaks about us, to us, and sometimes against us. A house tells the story of its owner without words. The way walls rise, windows open, and furniture settles into place reflects the person who lives there. When you walk into a space, you can sense its character. Some homes reveal discipline in their neatness. Others reveal curiosity in their clutter. A house works as a quiet mirror, showing us who we are through the choices we make about how we live. Philip Johnson's glass house in Connecticut is a clear example. Completed in 1949, it is a modernist icon. The house is built almost entirely of glass. Every side is transparent. Inside, there are no interior walls apart from the bathroom. Living in that house means living in constant exposure. There is no hiding, no private corner. If the glass house could speak, it would say, "You value control, you want clarity, and you accept the risk of being seen." Johnson built it for himself, and it captured his belief in purity of design and his need for performance. Think about what it means to sit there after sunset. The person inside sees out into the dark, but anyone outside can look straight in. Privacy does not exist. The house judges its owner by insisting on openness. It rewards those who want light, proportion, and elegance, and it punishes those who crave secrecy. It reflects a personality that is willing to trade comfort for transparency. The industrial loft tells another story. Across cities in North America and Europe, factories and warehouses have been turned into apartments. These buildings were once full of machines, workers, and dust. Now they are places of polished wood floors, high ceilings, and art on the walls. The brick, steel, and open spans remain, carrying the memory of labor. When someone lives in a loft, they live with that past. The loft, if it could speak, might say, "You admire the rough. You find beauty in what others discard. You want to link your life with history." Yet the loft might also accuse. It could say, "You turn production into fashion. You use traces of work for decoration. You raise the cost of living for others while seeking authenticity for yourself." The loft, like the glass house, is a mirror. It shows its residents' taste, but it also points to wider social and economic forces. In cities, loft conversions have often gone hand in hand with gentrification. The building's voice carries not only personal reflection, but also collective judgment. These examples show how architecture frames values. A home does not sit neutral. The design shapes how people live. In the glass house, clutter becomes almost impossible because it ruins the view through the glass walls. In the loft, clutter feels almost expected because the space invites spread and layering. A building trains its residents, and in turn, it tells them what kind of people they are becoming. Everyday homes carry the same effect. Think of a suburban house with a trimmed lawn, matching shutters, and a driveway lined with cars. The house reflects a concern for order and a wish to show belonging in the neighborhood. Now picture a cramped studio, where every surface is stacked with books, where thrift store chairs sit under mismatched lamps. That home reflects a different set of values, the priority of thought over order, the comfort found in chaos. Each home speaks, not with words, but with form. The choices made in design and upkeep reveal ethics as well as taste. Glass walls suggest openness, but also a hunger for control. Exposed brick suggests strength, but also nostalgia. Buying a home shows one kind of relationship to stability. Renting shows another, linked to freedom and uncertainty. Even decisions as small as where a sofa faces can reflect priorities, toward the television, toward the window, or toward a table for conversation. Sometimes the home shows what its resident would rather not admit. A bare, minimalist interior may reveal a fear of clutter, not a love of calm. A loft full of antiques may reveal a longing for authenticity, not simply an appreciation for history. The building judges not by what its owner claims, but by how it is used and shaped. Even abandoned houses continue to mirror. A peeling wall tells of neglect. A child's drawing taped to a door tells of care once given. A locked basement suggests fear or secrecy. These traces remain after people leave, and the building becomes a memory of its former residents. In this way, architecture speaks not only to those inside, but also about those long gone. When you step into your own space at the end of the day, you are entering a reflection of yourself. The arrangement of shoes by the door, the color of the walls, the presence or absence of photographs, all of it carries meaning. The building notes your habits and your choices. It reflects back your order or your chaos, your openness or your need to hide. It does not flatter. It shows what is there. The glass house says something different from the loft. The suburban cottage says something different from the cramped studio. Each space gives voice to its form. If buildings could speak, they would remind us that we are not just living in them. We are being reflected by them, shaped by them, and judged by them. A building does not sit silent when we step into it. The way we use a space, or fail to use it, leaves marks that speak louder than words. A polished lobby shows respect and care. A cracked wall or leaking ceiling shows neglect. Over time, the way we inhabit and maintain buildings becomes their judgment of us. They tell us whether we give back to the spaces that shelter us, or whether we drain them without thought. Public institutions show this most clearly. Libraries. Schools and hospitals exist to serve, yet they are often the clearest reflections of how a society values or dismisses its people. A library that is open, bright, and welcoming tells a visitor that knowledge matters. It says the community values learning not only for those who can pay, but for all who walk in. A crumbling school building with outdated equipment tells a different story. It shows how little importance is placed on education in that community, or at least on the children who study there. Hospitals carry the same weight. A clean, well-maintained ward reflects care for human dignity, while a crowded corridor lined with patients waiting for hours shows the opposite. These buildings do not simply host activity. They hold the record of how we treat each other. The New York Public Library stands as an example of this double message. Its grand main branch on Fifth Avenue, with the marble lions at its entrance, makes a powerful statement about generosity. Anyone can walk inside and use its reading rooms. It does not charge admission. It places the weight of architecture, high ceilings, sweeping staircases, carved stone, into public service. If the library could speak, it would say, "You value free access to knowledge, and you see learning as a shared right." At the same time, the building also speaks through its flaws. There are corners where paint peels, bathrooms that feel overlooked, and stacks of books that wait for repair. These small signs show neglect, even if quiet. The building judges us by holding the tension between care and abandonment. It offers generosity, but it also exposes the limits of that generosity in practice. Office towers give us another form of judgment. Their glass walls and towering height present themselves as symbols of progress. But what happens inside often tells a different story. Workers spend long hours in cubicles under artificial light. Security guards and cleaners enter through separate doors and work unseen. The building, if it could speak, might say, "You drive people to exhaustion in the name of productivity, and you divide their roles by value." The tower itself is efficient, climate-controlled, and sleek, but it also judges us by reflecting how labor is organized within its walls. It shows who gets the corner office with the skyline view and who is hidden in the windowless basement. The very design supports a hierarchy, and the wear on certain floors compared to others records the imbalance. Even the most private spaces, the homes we return to each night, carry this ethical weight. A domestic interior shows not only taste, but also the level of care given to it. A kitchen kept clean and working says the resident values nourishment and routine. A cracked sink or broken chair left unrepaired for years shows neglect, whether due to indifference or lack of means. The building itself holds the record of that choice. It judges the inhabitant by showing what has been maintained and what has been allowed to fall apart. Personalization adds another layer. Photos on walls, marks on door frames measuring a child's growth, or even the way furniture is rearranged reflect engagement with the space. A bare apartment with nothing added beyond what was already there shows distance or transience. The home itself speaks. You either invest yourself here or you do not. Consider a small scenario. Walk into a classroom in two different schools. In one, the walls carry posters, shelves of books are in reach, and the desks are marked by years of use but kept in working order. The space tells its students they belong, that they deserve an environment that supports learning. In another school, paint chips from the ceiling, desks wobble, and the floor is scuffed without repair. The message is just as clear. It tells its students they are not a priority. The building's voice becomes louder than any words from teachers or administrators. It communicates value, or the absence of it, through its very condition. Or picture two hospitals. In one, halls are wide, bright, and clean. Patients have privacy, and the equipment is maintained. In another, beds are lined up too close together, lights flicker, and the air feels stale. Both serve the same purpose, but they tell very different stories about how society sees those in need of care. The walls, the furniture, even the smell of disinfectant become part of the judgment. The building says, "Here, your suffering is taken seriously," or "Here, your suffering is only managed as best as possible." These judgments come not only from large public buildings, but also from our smallest domestic routines. A living room that gathers dust without cleaning, a roof that leaks without repair, a staircase cluttered with things never put away. These speak about the relationship between people and the spaces they inhabit. Care or neglect is visible in every crack and every polish. A building does not forgive the way we treat it. It records those choices, and it reflects them back to us. Office towers, schools, hospitals, libraries, and homes all share this quality. Their architecture sets a stage, but their judgment of us comes from how we use them. We reveal our ethics not through grand statements, but through daily wear and maintenance. When we clean, repair, personalize, or let decay spread, we leave our mark. The building responds by holding that mark as memory. It reminds us of what we gave and what we withheld. The ethics of use is not abstract. It lives in the state of door hinges, in the brightness of a hallway, in the presence or absence of comfort. A space does not need to speak to tell us how we have treated it. It only needs to stand there, carrying the record of our choices. And in that silence, it judges. Buildings can reveal power more clearly than speeches or laws. The materials, the layouts, and the access points all express who belongs where and who does not. When we look closely, we see hierarchy set in stone, steel, and glass. Architecture does not need to declare inequality aloud. It shows it in the way doors open, in the way streets are planned, and in the way space is divided. In London, luxury skyscrapers make this visible. These towers rise above the city with glass facades and expensive apartments that sell for millions. At street level, the ground floors often include affordable units set aside for residents on lower incomes. But in many cases, those residents cannot use the same entrance as the wealthy owners. Developers created separate back doors for the less privileged. These poor doors, as they came to be called, created public outrage. The tower itself made the division clear. One polished lobby with marble floors and concierge service greeted the wealthy. A narrow, plain entrance by the side alley welcomed the poor. The building, without words, judged its residents. It said, "Wealth enters here. Poverty slips in elsewhere." If you lived in one of those buildings, you would feel the separation each day. Walking past the main lobby, but being barred from it, is a reminder that space is not neutral. The skyscraper enforces a social script. You are allowed to live here, but you are not allowed to belong fully. The design performs hierarchy more strongly than any written policy could. It shapes behavior by setting rules into the building itself. On another continent, Brasilia tells a different story of power written into space. built in the late 1950s as Brazil's new capital, it was meant to be a utopian city. Its wide avenues, monumental plazas, and modernist buildings showed a vision of order, progress, and equality. The plan, drawn by Lucio Costa and realized with buildings by Oscar Niemeyer, placed government offices, cultural centers, and housing in precise alignment. From above, the city's layout even resembled an airplane, a symbol of movement and national ambition. Yet the utopia excluded many people in practice. The workers who built Brasilia were not given homes in the planned city. Instead, they settled on the outskirts in makeshift towns that later grew into satellite cities. The main plan offered grandeur for officials and middle-class residents, but it pushed the poor to the margins. Walking through Brasilia today, the monumental scale can feel impressive but also empty. The spaces are vast, the sidewalks long, and the sense of human scale is often lost. The city, in its very design, declares who it was built for. It embodies the dream of progress, but it also embodies the exclusion of those who labored to make that dream possible. Closer to everyday life, community centers and gated communities tell opposite moral stories. A community center is built for gathering. It opens its doors to children, elders, and anyone who wants to take part. Its design encourages access: a wide entrance, multi-purpose rooms, open courtyards. The center judges us by showing a commitment to shared resources and collective care. It creates a script of belonging, where people are expected to meet, share, and participate. A gated community sends the reverse message. Its walls, gates, and guards say that safety lies in separation. Inside, homes may be neat and streets may be calm, but the design itself rests on exclusion. The gate divides inside from outside, us from them. A child growing up in a gated community learns that access must be controlled and that belonging depends on a passcode or a guard's nod. The physical barrier enforces a social barrier, even if no one speaks about it. Architecture shapes behavior in ways that often go unnoticed. People queue at certain doors because the building has guided them to do so. Office workers gather near elevators at set times because the design funnels them into shared pauses. Residents in a housing estate might avoid certain courtyards if they feel unsafe, leaving those spaces unused. These unconscious patterns are part of what buildings enforce. They write scripts into our daily movements. A luxury tower with a poor door tells its less wealthy residents to keep out of sight. Brasilia's monumental plazas tell pedestrians they must walk far and feel small. A community center tells visitors to gather. A gated community tells strangers to stay away. Consider a simple example. A staircase placed at the front of a house invites guests to move freely upstairs. A staircase hidden at the back behind a door keeps that part of the house private. No words are needed. The building itself tells people how to behave. Multiply that across a city, and you see how entire populations follow scripts set by architects and planners, often without realizing it. Buildings are not neutral objects. They carry within their walls the decisions of those who designed them and the values of the societies that allowed them to be built. Luxury skyscrapers divide, utopian cities exclude, community centers welcome, and gated communities reject. Each of these forms reflects a moral choice, and each of them, in their silence, judges the people who live, work, or pass through them. Buildings carry memory in their walls. They hold the weight of events, habits, and emotions long after people have left. A house remembers its occupants through worn floors, patched walls, or doors that creak in familiar ways. A city remembers its people through landmarks, plazas, and monuments. When we walk through a place, we feel the presence of those who came before us, even if we do not know their names. Architecture does not forget as quickly as we do. The ruins of old structures show this most clearly. A broken column in a field tells us about a civilization that once thrived there. A crumbling fortress on a hill remembers battles and defenses long past. Ruins raise questions about permanence and decay. Some see them as evidence of endurance. Even when walls collapse, stone remains, testifying to human effort. Others see ruins as reminders of how fragile human ambition is, how time strips away even the strongest structures. In both views, ruins store memory. They judge us by showing how we tried to resist time and how time eventually overcame us. Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris offers a vivid case. For centuries, it has stood at the heart of the city, gathering layers of meaning. It was a place of worship, a symbol of national pride, and a site of art and literature. When fire tore through its roof in 2019, the response was immediate and global. People around the world mourned, even those who had never entered the cathedral. The burning roof became a symbol of shared loss. The building, in flames, judged us by showing how deeply tied we are to the structures that hold our collective memory. In the days after the fire, people placed flowers and candles outside. Leaders promised to rebuild, while others argued for leaving parts of the ruin exposed as a mark of history. The debate itself showed our struggle with time. Do we try to freeze a building at its best moment, or do we allow damage to become part of its story? Notre Dame spoke through its scars. It reminded us that memory is not static. It can be wounded, but it can also endure. Abandoned suburban malls tell a different story. In the late 20th century, malls were temples of consumerism. Families spent weekends there, teenagers met friends, and shoppers filled the wide corridors. The design itself reflected a culture of consumption: bright lights, climate control, endless parking. Today, many malls stand empty. Stores have closed, roofs leak, and weeds grow through cracked pavement. Walking through one of these places, you feel the ghost of a recent past. The food court tables are still there, but no trays rest on them. Escalators stand still, covered in dust. The mall remembers a time when buying and gathering seemed endless. Its silence now tells us that our consumer habits shift quickly. What was once central to daily life can fall into neglect in a single generation. These malls judge us by showing how short our sense of permanence can be. They expose the rise and fall of cultural priorities within a few decades. Heritage preservation raises the question of how we deal with time in architecture. Some argue for freezing a building exactly as it was at a certain moment. This approach treats architecture as a document, a record that must remain intact. Others argue for reworking buildings to keep them alive. A preserved ruin might remain untouched, a silent witness to history. A reworked building might gain new functions, allowing it to serve the present while keeping its past visible. The choice between freezing and reworking reveals different attitudes toward memory. Consider an old factory in a city. Left as a ruin, it tells of industry and decline. It becomes a reminder of what was lost when production moved elsewhere. Converted into housing or galleries, it tells a story of adaptation and reuse. Both paths preserve memory, but in different ways. One shows the permanence of history by refusing to cover decay. The other folds history into the present by making the building useful again. Each approach reflects a judgment about how we handle time. Memory in buildings is not only about famous sites or large structures. A small house can carry memory just as powerfully. A mark on the kitchen wall recording a child's growth remains even after the child leaves. A worn doorknob shows years of daily use. The house records the lives inside it and plays them back in subtle ways. When new occupants arrive, they inherit those traces. The building speaks of lives that are no longer present, often without words. Time always works against permanence. Fires, neglect, or simple wear bring change. Yet buildings resist total erasure. Even in fragments, they hold memory. A piece of stained glass in a church window, a stone arch in a field, or an empty escalator in a mall all tell stories about the people who once depended on them. These fragments shape how we think about history. They force us to face the tension between what we want to remember and what time allows us to keep. Architecture, in this sense, is never neutral. It does not just stand there as shelter or decoration. It is an archive. It gathers traces of human activity, preserves them, and passes them forward. When a cathedral burns, the world grieves because memory is damaged. When a mall closes, the silence reminds us that collective habits fade. When a ruin stands in the sun for centuries, it shows both the strength of human effort and the certainty of decline. In each case, the building speaks about memory, time, and history, and it asks us to listen. The shape of a building speaks before anyone enters it. Its height, its lines, and its surfaces carry a kind of voice. Even without knowing the history of a style, people can sense mood or character in form. A Gothic spire pulls the eye upward. A heavy concrete block presses down with force. A colorful facade, covered in odd shapes and patterns, seems to joke with its audience. Each style says something about the society that built it, and about the values of the people who choose to live or work within it. Gothic cathedrals are a clear case of form expressing aspiration. When you stand before one, the vertical lines and pointed arches stretch toward the sky. Light pours through stained glass windows, painting the interior with color. The building seems to urge both body and mind upward, beyond the ordinary. If such a cathedral could speak, it would say, "You are small, but you can reach for something higher." The style captures a desire for transcendence, a way of turning stone into prayer. The sheer effort required, generations of workers, carving, lifting, and assembling, also speaks of devotion. The cathedral embodies the collective will to express faith through form. It judges its visitors by reminding them that their lives are brief, while the structure aspires to eternity. Brutalism, which spread in the mid-20th century, tells a very different story. These buildings use raw concrete, strong angles, and heavy massing. They reject ornament in favor of exposed structure. Some people see in brutalism a kind of honesty. The building does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. It shows its material openly, without disguise. In that sense, it reflects pragmatic values, but others see in the same style a cold and authoritarian mood. The heavy concrete can feel oppressive. The sharp edges and fortress-like forms can make people feel unwelcome. If a brutalist building could speak, it might say, "I am strong, I am functional, and I will endure whether you like me or not." The judgment is ambiguous. Some admire its clarity. Others feel pushed away by its severity. Postmodern facades step in almost as a reaction to that severity. Where modernism sought purity and brutalism embraced strength, postmodernism often plays with irony. Bright colors, exaggerated shapes, and historical references appear side by side. A building might look like a temple, but be a shopping mall. Another might wear giant columns that serve no structural purpose. These choices introduce humor, but also raise questions. Is the building laughing with us or at us? Some see postmodern facades as witty, a reminder not to take architecture too seriously. Others see them as signs of cultural fatigue, where form no longer carries conviction, but only pastiche. If such a building could speak, it might say, "Meaning is flexible, everything can be borrowed, and sincerity is optional." Its judgment lies in how lightly it treats its own role. The Las Vegas Strip shows how style can move beyond humor into spectacle. Along this stretch of casinos and hotels, architecture becomes parody. One building imitates Venice with canals and gondolas. Another imitates Paris with an Eiffel Tower. Another offers pyramids and sphinxes in desert form. None of these structures serve their original function. They exist as simulations, copies of copies. Walking down the Strip is like walking through a collage of global history turned into entertainment. The effect is overwhelming, playful, and at times absurd. If the Strip could speak, it would not whisper. It would shout, "You came here for fantasy, and I will give it to you in excess." The buildings tell us that reality is less important than the image of reality. Water fountains dance in choreographed shows. Neon signs light the night as if time never passes. Visitors do not come to see authenticity. They come to experience the thrill of surface. the hyperreality where signs replace substance. The strip judges us by exposing our willingness to trade depth for spectacle. It shows how easily people accept imitation when it entertains. Each of these styles, Gothic, Brutalist, Postmodern, and the neon spectacle of Las Vegas, reveals character through form. Gothic architecture reaches upward to ideals. Brutalism presses downward with weight. Postmodern facades laugh at their own seriousness. Las Vegas builds an entire world out of copies. In each case, the building expresses values, hopes, or fears without words. It reflects the society that made it and the people who use it, and in doing so, it tells us something about ourselves, often more directly than we might like to admit. Cities act like vast archives, storing memory in streets, buildings, and materials. Every quarter holds a record of decisions made by those who built it. A narrow alley recalls a medieval past where walls pressed close for defense. A wide boulevard recalls a later age of empire or commerce. Even a street name can preserve memory of an event or person long forgotten by most of its residents. Walking through a city is like turning pages of a layered book. We read it without thinking, yet it shapes our sense of who we are and where we come from. Materials also hold memory. Stone blocks in an old wall show marks of tools once swung by hand. Wood beams carry traces of forests long cut down. Steel beams remember the furnaces and the workers who cast them. Glass carries the signature of its age, from wavy panes in 19th century houses to flawless sheets in today's towers. These traces remind us that buildings are never only objects. They are records of labor and craft. Even when we do not see the maker, the material carries their presence. The wear of feet on marble steps, the polish on a brass doorknob, the patina of copper on a roof, each marks time and human contact. The Reichstag in Berlin stands as a case where memory is layered in one building. Built in the late 19th century as a parliament, it soon became tied to imperial ambitions. In 1933, fire damaged it, an event used by the Nazi regime to tighten control. Later, bombs in the Second World War left it in ruins. For decades during the Cold War, the Reichstag stood near the Berlin Wall, a silent witness to division. After reunification, it was rebuilt with a new glass dome designed by Norman Foster. This dome opens the building to light and offers citizens a view down into the chamber of government. The building today speaks of democracy, transparency, and renewal. Yet its walls also still carry scars of history. You can see Soviet graffiti left by soldiers in 1945. Each layer remains, making the Reichstag a living archive of German history. It judges the nation by showing both destruction and resilience, dictatorship and democracy. Monuments work in a similar way, though they often compress memory into a single form. The Eiffel Tower in Paris was once dismissed as an eyesore. Built for the 1889 World's Fair, it was seen as too modern, too industrial. Yet, over time, it became a symbol not only of Paris, but of France itself. Its iron structure reflects the technological ambition of its age. Today, it holds memories of countless personal moments, from protests beneath it to proposals at its top. The tower carries national pride and also the mark of changing taste. What was once mocked is now treasured. In that shift, the tower speaks of how cultural memory can change, how time reshapes what we admire. The Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., shows how architecture can hold political memory with great force. Its form recalls a Greek temple, linking the American Republic to ideals of democracy. Inside sits the statue of Abraham Lincoln, larger than life, carved in stone. In the 1960s, the memorial became a stage for the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech on its steps. That moment became part of the building's memory. To stand there now is not only to remember Lincoln's role in ending slavery, but also to recall the struggle for equality a century later. The memorial is more than stone columns and a statue. It is an archive of political ideals and public action. Societies project their dreams and dilemmas into their built form. A skyscraper may represent economic ambition. A stadium may represent collective pride or escape. A courthouse with grand steps may declare the authority of law. These choices are not neutral. They show what a society wants to say about itself. In times of optimism, architecture often grows tall, open, and experimental. In times of fear, it grows heavy, closed, and defensive. The built environment records these moods long after the people who felt them are gone. Take a walk through any major city, and you can see these projections. In New York, Art Deco towers like the Chrysler Building show the glamour and confidence of the 1920s. In Moscow, Stalinist skyscrapers show power and intimidation. In Brasilia, the sweeping curves of Niemeyer's designs show the dream of a modern, unified nation. Even as the city's layout excluded many of its workers, the buildings store these ideals of their contradictions. They reflect both aspiration and failure. Even ordinary houses carry this role. A row of identical suburban homes records a moment when affordability and uniformity were prized. Their repetition speaks of a dream of stability and family life. A block of public housing records another moment when governments tried to provide shelter at scale, often with mixed results. Both kinds of housing carry memory of social policies and cultural values. They stand as documents as much as shelters. When we think of archives, we imagine shelves of paper or digital files. But the largest archive is the city itself. Every stone and beam is part of the record. Architecture remembers not only what happened, but also what people hoped would happen. It stores victories and failures, ideals and fears. The Reichstag shows the arc from empire to dictatorship to democracy. The Eiffel Tower shows how rejection can turn to pride. The Lincoln Memorial shows how a monument can gather new meanings across generations. These buildings, like all buildings, are not silent. They carry memory, and they tell us who we have been. Architecture does more than shelter us. It directs how we move, where we look, and even how we behave. Without needing signs or guards, buildings often enforce social norms through their design. A corridor funnels people in a single direction. A waiting room forces silence. A wide plaza encourages gathering, while a narrow stairwell discourages lingering. These choices in form and layout shape our conduct every day, usually without our noticing. One of the most striking examples is the panopticon prison design proposed in the late 18th century by Jeremy Bentham. Its structure is simple, cells arranged in a circle around a central watchtower. From the tower, a guard can look into any cell at any time. The prisoners, however, cannot see the guard. This means they never know when they are being watched. The design enforces discipline without the need for constant action. The prisoner must assume observation at all times, so he polices himself. The panopticon shows how architecture can embody power. The building itself becomes a tool of control. If it could speak, it would say, "You are never alone, you are always visible, and you must obey." The structure creates obedience by design, not by force. The principle of the panopticon extends beyond prisons. Modern workplaces, schools, and even shopping malls often rely on open layouts and surveillance to guide behavior. In many offices, rows of desks without partitions ensure that employees remain visible. The design encourages steady work and discourages distraction. Even without a manager present, workers know they can be seen. The architecture, like the prison tower, enforces productivity. It shapes how people behave by making observation possible at all times. Employment agencies offer another example of quiet architectural enforcement. Walk into many of these offices, and you will see a layout designed to emphasize control and dependency. Waiting areas are often sparse, with rows of chairs facing a counter or desk. Clients sit for long periods under fluorescent lights, waiting for their number to be called. Privacy is minimal. People can overhear conversations about benefits, interviews, or personal circumstances. The space itself conveys a hierarchy. The staff behind the counter have authority, and the clients must wait. The building enforces patience, silence, and compliance. It says, "You are here to be processed, not to shape the process." The experience is not only bureaucratic, but also architectural. The physical arrangement reinforces the social order. Skyscrapers add another dimension to how architecture expresses power. These tall buildings dominate city skylines. They symbolize ambition, wealth, and global commerce. Their height makes them visible for miles, turning them into icons of capitalism. But inside, skyscrapers also enforce hierarchy. The top floors are reserved for executives, offering panoramic views. The middle floors hold middle management. The lower floors contain support staff, or sometimes no offices at all, just lobbies and retail space. The building sorts people vertically, reflecting and reinforcing corporate structures. The skyscraper says, "Those at the top command, those below serve," and the structure itself embodies the ladder you must climb. Even elevators participate in this hierarchy. Some are express lifts to executive levels, while others stop at every floor. The building silently dictates the pace and order of movement. For the city as a whole, urban megacities reveal another layer of power and norms. These vast environments grow so large that they no longer feel like places to live in a personal sense. Instead, they feel like systems to be navigated. Housing blocks stretch for miles, highways cut across neighborhoods, towers overshadow streets. In such environments, the sense of domestic life often weakens. People live in small units, commute long distances, and spend more time in transit than at home. Public squares shrink or disappear, leaving fewer places for casual community. The city becomes a machine for work and consumption. This loss of domesticity creates alienation. Residents may feel anonymous, one among millions. The architecture reinforces this feeling. Identical apartment towers erase individuality. Wide freeways make walking unpleasant or unsafe. Shopping malls replace small local shops, turning social life into a controlled commercial setting. The city itself seems to say, "Keep moving, keep working, keep buying." It no longer whispers of home or intimacy. Instead, it enforces patterns of behavior that suit large-scale economies but weaken personal connection. Think of someone walking through a megacity at night. They pass under glowing billboards, past endless office towers with lights still on. They cross wide intersections where cars roar past. Their own apartment is on the 23rd floor of a tower with hundreds of identical units. In such a setting, it is difficult to feel known or rooted. The architecture directs them to function within the system, but not to belong deeply to it. The built form enforces alienation through its very scale. These examples show how architecture does more than reflect society. It actively shapes it. The panopticon enforces obedience through constant possibility of observation. Employment agencies enforce dependency by controlling space and movement. Skyscrapers enforce corporate hierarchy by sorting people vertically. Megacities enforce alienation by erasing intimacy in favor of efficiency. In all these cases, the architecture does not need to announce its rules. The form itself acts as a silent enforcer. It guides, it restricts, it channels, and in doing so, it judges the people who live, work, and move within it. Buildings exist in time, and time always changes them. Walls crack, roofs sag, and materials wear down. Faced with this, societies develop ways to hold on. Conservation is one of the clearest expressions of the human desire to resist change. When people restore a monument, they are not only repairing stone or wood, they are making a statement about memory. To conserve is to freeze a moment, to insist that the building must look as it did at a certain point in history. This choice often says as much about the present as about the past. A castle preserved in perfect condition may speak less about medieval life and more about modern longing for continuity. The act of holding a building still is a way of fixing memory against the flow of time. Modernity complicates this impulse. New forms arrive, and they rarely respect tradition. Steel and glass towers rise where brick houses once stood. Concrete highways cut through old neighborhoods. The pace of new construction can feel like a shock. It destabilizes familiar places, replacing them with structures that follow a different logic. For some, this shock is exciting, a sign of progress. For others, it is disorienting, a loss of identity. Buildings become battlegrounds between those who want to protect what is known and those who want to embrace what is new. The city becomes the stage where tradition and innovation struggle, each leaving marks that cannot be erased. Venice presents this conflict in vivid form. The city is famous for canals, bridges, and palaces built centuries ago. It is also famous for trying to hold itself still. Visitors often feel as if they are walking through a preserved stage set. Yet Venice is not outside of time. The water that defines it also threatens it. Rising tides and heavy tourism wear down the stones. The city survives by turning itself into a spectacle. Preservation becomes not just protection, but performance. Every facade, every gondola, every square feels curated for the gaze of visitors. Conservation here does not only freeze memory, it sells memory as experience. The city speaks by showing how fragile and precious it is, yet it also judges us for consuming its image while adding to its strain. The choice to preserve Venice in this way locks it in a role. It must remain the same, even as the world changes around it. Warsaw after the Second World War shows a very different approach to time and change. The city was devastated, with much of its historic center destroyed. In the years after the war, Poland faced a choice: leave the ruins as they were, build entirely new structures, or rebuild what had been lost. The decision was to reconstruct the old city. Using paintings, photographs, and surviving fragments, workers and architects rebuilt streets, squares, and houses to resemble their earlier form. This was not conservation in the strict sense, since the buildings were largely new. It was reconstruction as identity. Warsaw judged itself by refusing to let destruction erase its past. The rebuilt city became a symbol of resilience, a way of saying that history could be recovered even after violence. Yet it also raised questions. Was this authentic history or a carefully staged version of it? In either case, it showed how architecture can negotiate time by choosing what to carry forward. The balance between tradition and innovation is always fragile. Too much focus on conservation can turn cities into museums, frozen and unable to adapt. Too much focus on new forms can erase memory, leaving people unmoored from their past. The negotiation happens every time a historic building faces redevelopment or a new design rises near an old landmark. Each decision reflects values. What must be kept, what can be altered, and what can be lost. Think of a neighborhood where a historic warehouse district has fallen into disuse. One option is to freeze it, to keep the warehouses as they are, protected but unused. Another option is to demolish them and build modern apartments. A third option is to adapt them, turning the warehouses into lofts, galleries, or markets. Each choice sends a message. Freezing declares reverence for history, but risks leaving the area lifeless. Demolishing clears space for growth, but cuts ties with the past. Adapting balances both, allowing new life while keeping memory visible. The negotiation lies not in choosing one answer for all time, but in weighing the values of each moment. Cities that succeed in this balance often weave layers of history together. A medieval church may stand beside a modern office tower. A 19th century theater may be repurposed as a cinema. The presence of both old and new gives the city depth. It reminds people that history continues rather than ends. The built environment becomes a dialogue between past and present, not a war. Venice and Warsaw represent extremes, one frozen into spectacle, the other rebuilt from ruin. Between them lie countless examples of smaller negotiations. In London, Victorian warehouses became restaurants and apartments. In Tokyo, new towers rise alongside wooden temples. In Berlin, pieces of the wall remain as memorials, even as new buildings cover the scars of division. Each case shows how societies choose what to remember, what to forget, and what to reinvent. Architecture cannot escape time, but it can shape how we experience it. Conservation tries to stop decay, even if only for a while. Modernity pushes forward, unsettling what is stable. Between them, cities find ways to carry memory and embrace change. Buildings become records of these decisions, standing as witnesses to our struggle with history itself. Buildings can be read like sentences. Their forms carry meaning in two layers, much like words. The first layer is denotation, the literal function. A door denotes entry. A staircase denotes movement from one level to another. These are practical, clear, and universally understood. The second layer is connotation, the additional meaning that attaches itself to the form. A heavy wooden door may connote safety, tradition, or wealth. A spiral staircase may connote elegance, mystery, or even danger. Architecture works in this dual way. It tells us what to do while also telling us how to feel about it. Because of this, architecture is often described as a form of writing. A building organizes space the way a sentence organizes words. Just as grammar sets rules for how words link together, architectural conventions set rules for how spaces connect. Corridors, thresholds, and windows follow patterns that we learn to read almost unconsciously. When you enter a church and see a long central aisle, you know where to walk. When you step into a train station and see a wide hall lined with signs, you know you are meant to disperse toward platforms. These cues do not need explanation. They are written into the space itself, and we learn to read them through experience. Le Corbusier's Villa Savoye in France shows this idea in a pure form. Built in the late 1920s, it embodies his 5 points of architecture. The house is raised on pilotis, or slender supports, so the ground floor is left open. The roof is flat and functions as a terrace. The floor plan is open and flexible. Windows run in long horizontal bands, and the facade is free of load-bearing limits. The result is a house that writes rationalism into its walls. Walking through it, you experience clarity, order, and proportion. The ramps and stairs guide you smoothly from one space to another, creating a sense of continuous flow. The house does more than provide shelter. It communicates a utopian ideal that life can be improved by design based on logic and universal principles. Yet Villa Savoye also shows the limits of this language. For the family who lived there, the house was often uncomfortable. The flat roof leaked, the open plan offered little privacy, and the thin walls were not practical in cold weather. What read as rational and elegant in drawings and theory felt less forgiving in daily life. This tension between message and use shows how architecture as writing can sometimes misjudge its audience. The building said one thing, clarity, order, ideal living, but the lived experience spoke another language of inconvenience and compromise. Where Villa Savoye reflects rationalism, Disneyland reflects fantasy. Built in California in 1955, it presents an environment designed not to reflect reality, but to simulate it. The park is divided into lands, each with its own theme. Main Street, USA, presents an idealized small town. Adventureland, Tomorrowland, and Fantasyland each create different worlds. The visitor reads these environments as stories. The forms denote simple functions, streets, shops, rides, but they connote entire narratives. A castle denotes a central landmark, but it also connotes fairy tales, power, and dreams. A rocket ride denotes amusement, but it also connotes human ambition and the thrill of exploration. Disneyland uses architectural writing to persuade. The park hides its functional needs, like trash removal or staff movement, behind carefully designed facades. It controls sight lines, so visitors always see a curated view. Streets are scaled slightly smaller than real ones to create a sense of intimacy and charm. Music, smells, and colors add to the message. The design directs behavior. People slow down at widened areas, line up where barriers guide them, and spend money where storefronts catch their eye. The environment manipulates not by command, but by subtle cues. It persuades visitors to act as the designers intended, often without their noticing. This manipulation happens in many places outside of theme parks. A shopping mall directs movement with its central atrium and escalators. A fast food restaurant uses hard chairs and bright lights to encourage quick eating and departure. A luxury hotel uses soft lighting, plush carpets, and long corridors to slow movement and create calm. Each design choice shapes behavior. The visitor reads the building, responds to its grammar, and acts according to its script. Even in ordinary homes, the same principles apply. A living room organized around a television invites gathering for entertainment. A dining room centered on a long table encourages family meals. A bedroom with a narrow window and thick curtains invites rest and privacy. These are denotations of function, but they carry connotations as well. The living room may connote leisure, the dining room tradition, the bedroom retreat. The house writes a story of daily life in its layout. What makes architecture powerful is that this writing often goes unnoticed. We respond to cues without thinking. A wide staircase feels grand, so we slow our pace. A narrow corridor feels tense, so we hurry through. A high ceiling inspires awe, while a low one encourages intimacy. These effects shape our perception and behavior at every scale. They work not by explicit instruction, but by the silent grammar of space. Villa Savoye shows the optimism of treating architecture as a universal language of reason. Disneyland shows the persuasive force of treating architecture as fantasy and story. Both remind us that buildings are not mute. They speak in denotations and connotations, in grammar and metaphor. We read them whether we realize it or not, and as we read, we act. The walls, doors, and pathways around us write the scripts we follow, guiding our steps and shaping our thoughts in ways as subtle and powerful as any written text. Architecture often carries visions of the future. Some designs offer hope, imagining a better way of living. Others reveal control, isolation, or despair. In both cases, buildings do not simply provide shelter. They present critiques of the present and predictions of what is to come. Utopian visions show what might be possible if society embraced new ideals. Dystopian forms show what happens when those ideals break down or when power hardens into structure. Soviet constructivism provides a clear example of utopian ambition in built form. Emerging after the Russian Revolution, it sought to create a new architecture for a new society. The designs favored geometric forms, open structures, and new materials. Housing blocks, communal facilities, and factories were imagined as machines for living and working. The architecture carried optimism. It declared that by reshaping buildings, people could reshape society itself. The Narkomfin building in Moscow, built in the 1930s, reflected this idea. It contained shared kitchens, communal spaces, and apartments designed to encourage collective life. The structure was not just a shelter, it was a model for socialist living. Yet, constructivism also revealed limits. Many projects remained unbuilt because they were too ambitious or too costly. Others, like Narkomfin, fell into disrepair as daily life proved more complicated than the ideals allowed. Families wanted private kitchens, not only shared ones. Maintenance required more resources than the state could provide. Over time, the optimism of constructivism gave way to more rigid and monumental forms under Stalin, where the emphasis shifted from communal experimentation to displays of state power. The legacy of constructivism still lingers, though. Its radical designs influenced modern architecture around the world, and its spirit continues in projects that see architecture as a tool for social change. The movement shows both the hope and the failure of trying to design utopia through buildings. Contemporary eco-architecture represents another form of utopian thinking, this time focused on sustainability. Designers create buildings that use renewable energy, recycle water, and reduce waste. Green roofs, solar panels, and natural ventilation systems show an effort to live in harmony with the environment. These projects critique a world built on consumption and waste. They ask people to imagine a society that values balance rather than growth at all costs. A building like the Bosco Verticale in Milan, with trees planted on its balconies, turns the facade itself into a vertical forest. It says, we can live in cities without giving up nature if we rethink our forms. But eco-architecture also faces challenges. Many green projects are expensive and limited to wealthier areas. They can become symbols of sustainability more than widespread solutions. A single high-rise with gardens may inspire, but it does not solve the deeper issues of resource use across entire regions. Like constructivism, eco-architecture carries both optimism and difficulty. It reflects the hope that buildings can guide society toward a better relationship with the planet, while also showing how hard it is to scale ideals into daily life. Still, the presence of such buildings shifts perception. They judge us by showing how wasteful our conventional designs are, and by pointing toward alternatives. Not all visions are hopeful. The growth of megacities reveals forms that many experience as dystopian. In these vast environments, millions live within networks of highways, towers, and sprawling suburbs. Within them appear what the anthropologist Marc Augé called non-places. These are spaces like airports, shopping malls, and highway rest stops. They function efficiently, but carry little identity or memory. They are designed for movement, transaction, and control. An airport directs people through check-in, security, gates, and exits, reducing individuality to a boarding pass. A mall organizes people around consumption, with corridors that loop past storefronts in endless repetition. Highways flatten landscapes into routes measured only by speed and distance. These non-places strip away history and attachment. They judge us by revealing how much of modern life is spent in spaces where we pass through without belonging. Living in a megacity often means moving from one non-place to another. A person may wake in a high-rise apartment, commute on a highway, spend the day in a glass office tower, shop in a mall, and fly from an airport. Each space functions, yet each also erodes intimacy. Domesticity, memory, and individuality are replaced with standardization and scale. The architecture enforces efficiency while erasing depth. The judgment is clear. Society values movement, consumption, and productivity more than belonging or continuity. The future of architecture may intensify these judgments as digital systems and artificial intelligence shape design. Smart cities promise efficiency by embedding sensors in streets, traffic lights, and buildings. Apartments may adjust temperature based on predictive algorithms. Offices may track movement to optimize work. Surveillance cameras already record behavior, and facial recognition may extend the reach of architectural control. A city of this kind could say, "I know your habits, I predict your needs, and I guide your actions." The line between building and machine blurs, turning architecture into a form of governance. This raises both utopian and dystopian possibilities. Smart systems could reduce waste, prevent congestion, and make life smoother, but they could also eliminate privacy, enforce conformity, and turn citizens into data points. The building of the future may no longer simply shelter. It may watch, interpret, and decide. Imagine an apartment that locks its doors when rent is unpaid, or an office that tracks keystrokes through its walls. These are not distant fantasies. They are real possibilities in the age of connected architecture. In this sense, buildings will continue to judge us, but in ways more active than before. A medieval cathedral judged by its grandeur, a Soviet housing block judged by its collectivism, a green tower judged by its environmental ethic. Tomorrow's smart buildings may judge in real time, responding to behavior with rewards or restrictions. The architecture of utopia and dystopia is no longer confined to visionaries' drawings. It is being built around us, one sensor and one design choice at a time. A house is more than walls and a roof. For most people, it is the first universe, the place where life begins to take shape. It shelters the body, but it also holds the imagination. Childhood memories often tie themselves to corners, stairs, or rooms that seem ordinary from the outside, but hold deep meaning for those who live there. The house contains dreams as much as furniture, and in this sense, it becomes a cosmos, a small world where memory and identity take form. Certain spaces within a house carry a special weight. Attics often feel removed from daily life. They are high, hard to reach, filled with boxes, dust, and objects no longer in use. For a child, an attic can become a realm of mystery. Light slants through small windows, and every trunk or crate holds the possibility of discovery. The attic becomes the mind's storage space where memories and forgotten moments sit in silence. cellars serve the opposite role. They are low, dark, and close to the earth. A cellar may store food, tools, or firewood, but it also carries a sense of unease. The creak of the steps, the smell of damp, the shadows along the wall all contribute to its character. Where the attic can feel like a space of thought and imagination, the cellar feels like a space of instinct, fear, or secrecy. Corridors, too, shape memory. They are the in-between places, neither rooms of purpose nor mere emptiness. Walking down a hallway at night, with doors shut on either side, can bring feelings of suspense or curiosity. These transitional spaces carry weight because they connect the known with the unknown. The philosopher Gaston Bachelard explored these ideas in his book, The Poetics of Space. He argued that the house is not only an object, but also a vessel of imagination. According to him, the way people remember their homes shows how space becomes tied to emotion. The attic, for example, represents clarity, thought, and memory. The cellar, by contrast, represents what is hidden, instinctive, or repressed. Corridors, staircases, and closets become places of reverie or fear. Bachelard suggested that to understand a person, one could study the spaces of their intimate life. The house becomes a map of the inner world, where rooms echo feelings and arrangements reflect states of mind. This can be seen in the way furniture is placed. A living room where chairs face each other around a table invites conversation. A living room where every seat faces the television encourages passive gathering. A bedroom with a desk against the window suggests a person who seeks inspiration outside, while a desk against the wall suggests a person who prefers focus without distraction. Even small choices, whether to place photographs on walls, to leave books stacked in piles, or to keep surfaces bare, reveal something about personality. Furniture is not neutral. It organizes social life, directs attention, and creates a rhythm for daily activity. Imagine entering two homes. In the first, the kitchen table sits at the center, covered with marks from meals and projects. Shelves hold jars, and the smell of cooking lingers. The house tells you that food and gathering are central. In the second, the kitchen is sleek and unused, with appliances polished but rarely touched. The living room is dominated by screens and devices. This house tells you that cooking is secondary and entertainment holds greater value. In each case, the arrangement of objects speaks a language, showing what the inhabitants care about and how they live. Memory ties itself to these spaces and objects. A child may remember tracing patterns on wallpaper or the sound of a stair that always creaked. Years later, those details hold meaning far beyond their function. They are pieces of personal history stored in architecture. A house gathers such traces. Marks on a doorframe measuring a child's height remain long after the child has grown. Scratches on a floor recall where furniture once stood. These physical reminders become part of the identity of the house, even if new occupants arrive. The building carries memory beyond individual lives, layering past and present together. This dialogue between memory and dwelling is constant. People shape their houses by arranging, decorating, repairing, or neglecting. In return, the house shapes them by holding memories, triggering associations, and framing daily routines. Someone may feel comfort in a certain room not because of its size or color, but because of the experiences tied to it. A window that frames a particular tree may become a source of calm. A corner where toys once scattered may remain a place of warmth even when emptied. The house speaks through these associations, reminding its inhabitants of who they were and who they are. Even temporary homes participate in this dialogue. A rented apartment, filled with secondhand furniture, still gathers traces of its occupant. The way clothes are stored, the way a bed is placed, the choice of light or shadow, all leave marks. Over time, the resident remembers not only the activities of life, but the space that held them. Years later, they may recall the shape of the hallway or the sound of the floor more clearly than the details of what they did there. The architecture lingers in memory as strongly as events themselves. The house, as cosmos, means that it is never just a backdrop. It is a container of the self, a stage for dreams, and a partner in memory. Attics, cellars, corridors, and rooms each hold roles that extend beyond use. Furniture placement reveals priorities and attitudes. traces of daily life become archives of personal history. Bachelard's insight was that space and self cannot be separated. To dwell in a house is to live within a universe that mirrors and shapes the imagination. The dialogue between memory and dwelling continues as long as the walls stand, and even after, in the minds of those who once called it home. When we first considered what it would mean for a building to judge us, the thought may have seemed strange. Yet as we have moved through glass houses, libraries, towers, cathedrals, and cellars, it has become clear that buildings already speak. They record choices, reflect values, and hold memories. They do not stay silent. They stand as witnesses, sometimes generous, sometimes severe. If we pause to listen, they return our gaze. In the present, certain forms dominate the landscape. The glass tower rises in almost every major city. It insists on visibility and transparency, but also on conformity. To work inside one is to accept a world where walls vanish, where views matter more than privacy, and where efficiency shapes the rhythm of life. The glass tower judges by its scale and by its glare. It asks whether we value openness or whether we have traded substance for appearance. It also exposes the labor within. Every lit floor at night is a reminder of hours worked, ambitions pursued, or exhaustion masked behind gleaming facades. If the tower could speak, it might ask whether we have confused progress with height. Eco-villages and sustainable housing developments tell a different story. Their green roofs, shared gardens, and recycled materials are statements of ethics. They suggest that human life can align with ecological balance, yet they too offer judgments. They often require wealth and education to access, making sustainability itself a privilege. A family living in such a place is marked as forward-looking, but the building also reveals inequality by showing who can afford to live with lower carbon footprints. The eco-house whispers of ideals, but it also reveals gaps between aspiration and access. Its judgment lies in the tension between ethics and exclusion. Data centers, by contrast, rarely invite admiration. They sit on the edges of towns, silent and windowless. They hold the servers that shape communication, trade, and memory. Their architecture is blunt, pragmatic, almost mute. Yet in their silence, they reveal a truth about the present. They show a society that stores more information than it can comprehend, that trusts invisible machines to preserve knowledge and connection. A data center judges by reminding us of our dependence. If it could whisper, it might say that our lives now exist more fully inside circuits than inside walls. These forms suggest how future generations might read us. They may see the towers as monuments of ambition and blindness, the eco-villages as experiments in conscience, the data centers as temples of digital faith. They may wonder why we built so high, why we sought to live so cleanly yet so unevenly, why we placed so much trust in buildings that neither welcomed us nor needed windows. If a building could whisper one truth about you, it might be simple. It would not speak of wealth or status. It would speak of use, of care, of memory. A worn step would say you passed here often. A desk covered with marks would say you worked and thought here. A garden bed with roots deep in the soil would say you gave time to life outside yourself. The judgment of a building is never abstract. It is always tied to the trace you leave behind, the habits you form, and the ways you share or withhold. In this sense, when buildings speak back, they do not flatter, they remind.